That is what we call inflation. Now the economic survey begins with recent trends in inflation. Don't bother, don't do it. One thing you should keep in mind is that when we use the word headline inflation, so headline inflation is inflation used for policy making. You know, जो inflation use होता है for policy making. What we call inflation. Now the economic survey begins with recent trends in inflation. Don't bother, don't do it. One thing you should keep in mind is that inflation used for policy making. Good evening everyone. Thank you for being there. I hope I am audible to you now. Good evening everyone who is joining me now. I hope we are audible now. We are audible now? Perfect. Thank you. So good evening for being there and thank you for being there and very good evening to you. So I repeat again, today's chapter is a relatively easier chapter. It doesn't have much from your prelims or mains point of view. There are 3-4 main points. I will quickly cover them and you can be free for your dinner early today compared to what I do other days. So I started by talking about what is meant by inflation. Inflation is the rate of increase in price that takes place. मुद्रास्फीति, किस दर पर आपके जो प्राइसेस हैं, दाम है मार्केट में वो बढ़ रहे हैं और ये एवरेज लिया जाता है. It is taken as an average through consumer price index, wholesale price index. So index are created to measure the value of inflation. So inflation used for policy making is called headline inflation, and in India it is consumer price index combined. This C is for combined. Combined means rural as well as urban. In India, it is consumer price index combined. That is rural as well as urban. So this is our inflation when we talk about it in Indian context. Now, you know, when we, or coming back to this also, remember, when we talk about economic survey, in economic survey, very good evening and cheerful evening to all of you too. Shubh Sandhya, thank you for joining and thank you for being there. Very good evening. So now, you know, in economic survey, the first important discussion they do is on core inflation and the special index that they have created for core inflation. So in economic survey, they say that ideally when we talk about core inflation, you know, when we talk about core inflation means your headline inflation, whatever it is, say consumer price index combined minus cost of food or inflation in food and fuel, you know, so food and beverages and fuel and light. So when you calculate your core inflation, you take your headline inflation and subtract from there the inflation in food and fuel, inflation in food and fuel. So actually it is food and beverages and fuel and light. You know, we do that. So when you take a difference, the difference between CPIC and inflation in food and fuel, that is food and beverages and fuel and lights, you get core inflation, which can be controlled from demand side, because inflation in food, inflation in fuel cannot be controlled from demand side. If you recall, in our first discussion in economic survey, I had taught you that. So then what to do? अब क्या करें इस चीज में? तो इकोनॉमिक सर्वे कहता है कि भारत में यहाँ पर थोड़ी गड़बड़ी है. In the context of measuring these things in India, there is a slight problem here. What is that slight problem? The slight problem is when we count food fuel, we do not count diesel and petrol used for passenger vehicles, जिसके चलते बहुत सारा confusion हो जाता है. So this fuel and light, it does not include the inflation in diesel and petrol price, which is used for vehicles. You know, it doesn't include the diesel and petrol price, you know, for vehicle. Now this is put as a miscellaneous subset. ये जो price है, ये मिसलेनियस में पुट कर दिया जाता है अंडर ट्रांसपोर्टेशन. So the survey says that even if you subtract this, your core inflation remains high because of high fuel prices that have happened in the recent past. You know, because of the high fuel prices that have happened in the recent past. Light is electricity, Gaurav. Now see, CPI combined, Sumit. It is sample-wise, Parth. Now see, when we look at this fuel and light and transportation, this is something which has contributed heavily to India's inflation in 2021-22. And that is the next survey discussion that they do, that what is it that has driven inflation in India in the recent past. So remember, 2020-21, ये prelims के point of view से याद रखना, 2020-21 inflation was mainly due to food and beverages, this part. And 2021-22 inflation in food and beverages is low, but it is high due to high inflation in fuel and lights and miscellaneous inflation. And in this miscellaneous inflation, the major part is commercial vehicles and other inflation. So this is mainly due to diesel and petrol price increase that inflation has picked up in India in 2021-22. So survey says that due to, understand this better, हुआ क्या यहाँ, ये समझना जरूरी है कि क्यों inflation pick किया food, beverages में और food and fuel में. So what exactly happened here? Please understand this. So what happens is 2020-21 fuel price, especially petrol and diesel, you know, petrol and diesel, they go down. They go down, I'm talking global here, crude oil price and all, falls. Why? Because of the COVID-induced lockdowns and fall in demand. So demand कम हो गया, ये inflation कम हो गया. Now 2021-22 demand picks up, ये एक बात हुई for these crude oil based commodities. Containers are costly. This I had taught you in the previous chapters also. So transportation became costly, and add to that the supply chain constraints due to regular bouts of COVID, and all that combined with the difference in the difficulties we have observed, you know, supply chain constraint, and all this combined with the problem that we have seen very frequently in Middle East and now Eastern Europe. You know, the problem that we see, plus finally the disturbances in Middle East, that is West Asia and Eastern Europe. All this has contributed to high fuel inflation in India. And then the taxation levels are pretty high in India. Survey doesn't say that, but I'm just adding to your repertoire. आपको पता होना चाहिए कि और क्या कारण है. तो हमारे taxation levels भी काफी high हैं भारत में, और उसकी वजह से भी inflation आगे pick कर जाता है. So this is one thing from survey that you should keep in mind, one analysis, that why inflation has been observed like that. Now to catch the real idea of vehicle-based inflation, survey says India has created another concept called refined core inflation. ये याद रखना, ये prelims के point of view से ये definition important है. Refined core inflation, ये construct 2020-21 में ही हुआ है. अभी 2 साल पहले ही इसको construct किया गया as an index, refined core inflation. So what is this refined core inflation? Now we say that you take consumer price index combined, and from that you subtract not only food and beverages and fuel and light, but also the inflation in petrol and diesel for vehicles. So from this we subtract inflation in food and beverages, and we subtract inflation in fuel and light, and we now also subtract inflation in petrol and diesel for vehicles. These are now also subtracted to give us the refined core inflation. And survey says that this highlights that a lot of inflation in India, that large part of inflation in India is due to the fuel inflation, especially petrol and diesel, is due to petrol and diesel. That is what the survey suggests. So highlighting that you cannot manage it very easily from demand side, you have to manage it per se from your supply side. So this is one important thing that you should know from the topic on inflation. This is one aspect that you should know from topic of inflation. Okay, Varun, CPIC is also CPIN, national, but survey uses the term CPIC. All right, that is how it is taken. Prashant, you will have to leave a message for me. This is a question unrelated to our class, so I'm not taking the question at the moment. Okay, now remember, another thing that the survey highlights is that a lot of vegetable inflation in India is because of seasonality and irregularity. A lot of vegetable inflation in India is due to seasonality and irregularity. Again, from your prelims point of view, this information is important. Survey takes tomato and says that the seasonal fluctuations of price and seasonal shortages combined with uncertainty of global market, uncertainty of global or domestic market are responsible for inflation in tomato. And interestingly, survey says that the same thing is also true for high inflation in onion prices in India. Same thing, that seasonal fluctuation, प्राइस जो है वो सीजन के हिसाब से फ्लक्चुएट करते हैं. अब सर्वे ने एक बात नहीं बताई, अब सर्वे ने एक बात नहीं बताई जो मैं आपको बताता हूं होता क्या है हमारे यहाँ. So what happens is that the growing season, say take onion for example, the growing season for onion is either in the as a late rabi crop, so growing sometimes around December, January, that is the harvesting season, and then from December, January till April around, the supply of onion is regular. Now ideally what we should do, that we should store onion at this point of time, and we can use institutions like NAFED और हैफेड एंड सो ऑन. तो हमें अनियन को स्टोर करना चाहिए इस वक्त पे, क्योंकि नवंबर से लेकर अप्रैल तक अनियन की सप्लाई ज्यादा रहती है. अप्रैल में आते आते अनियन की सप्लाई कम होती है और सितंबर में इसकी शॉर्टेज बहुत तगड़ी हो जाती है. तो अगस्त से लेकर नवंबर तक अनियन प्राइसेस सीजनली बहुत हाई जाते हैं और फिर नवंबर से थोड़ा डिक्लाइन करना शुरू करते हैं. जनवरी फरवरी आते आते नॉर्मलाइज होते हैं, अप्रैल से फिर थोड़े बढ़ने लग जाते हैं. So this change in price of onion, and tomato shows the similar trend, that the change in price is seasonal. That when onion has seasons of supply, late kharif, early rabi, late rabi. So in that case, the onion supply is sufficient and prices don't fluctuate as much. On the other hand, suddenly if there is a shortage, the prices spike up. Sometimes it is also due to sudden rainfall in a growing area. Sometimes it is due to a sudden drought in a growing area. Sometimes it is due to failure of transportation facilities on properly or management facilities properly. So the survey says that the problem is not cyclical. It is not that due to business cycle this inflation is happening in fruit, vegetables like onion and tomato. And the problem is not trend. ये कोई average problem नहीं है. Problem is seasonal and problem is due to irregularity in understanding the methods by which shortages get created. So survey gives a policy suggestion for it. In fact, they have given 2 boxes for onion and tomato, but they say that this seasonality in price is because of the seasonal production pattern, which should be getting policy attention. So they say that government is implementing various measures to control it. So survey mentions those measures which you should keep in mind in case, because the survey has suggested it, in case in our exam, if they ask us about it. So this is about steps by government that the survey gives to control seasonality. तो कुछ 3-4 programs जो आप लिख सकते हो या जो prelims में पूछ सकते हैं, that what are the steps to control seasonality. Now see, when we look at this, no, crude oil prices are high due to other reasons also. You know, fuel here means all fuel except petrol and diesel for vehicle use. Yes, the refined ones overcomes the problem of the shortcomings of the core inflation in that sense. All right. No, we are subtracting it to check how much of the inflation can be controlled by demand side, Shatabdi. That is what we are doing. We are subtracting it to check how much is considered from demand side. Fuel is not different from petrol and diesel, Akanksha, but while taking fuel, we consider only, the values per se, that is with respect to kerosene and other fuel like biodegradables, and not petrol and diesel for vehicles, as I explained earlier. Now remember, the survey says that one scheme is Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture. So this is one scheme, Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture. This is one scheme of the government. Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture. Because when we say Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture, the basic idea here is that government gives a holistic development by assisting up to 50% of the project cost in developing horticultural crop. So 50% of project cost with a budget of 1.75 lakh crore funded by government. So this is one project that we work on or work with. This is on horticulture that it is worked with. This is Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture. So 50%, and this is mainly to store also. So total cost of rupees 1.75 lakh per unit for low cost onion storage at farm gate. This is the idea, that 1.75 lakh per unit of, developed for onion storage at farm gate. So this is one thing that the government has introduced and the survey mentions it. Operation Green is another, that is creating the basic infrastructure for transportation and purchases and storage of onion, tomato, potato, and now extended to 22 crops. That's another thing that the government has created for helping the farmers. Also, it says that agricultural marketing infrastructure is another scheme that the government has come up with for rural godowns to enable small farmers to store. Agricultural marketing infrastructure to develop rural godowns. Agricultural marketing infrastructure to encourage rural godowns so that small farmers can keep their storage without incurring much of a cost. बहुत ज़्यादा खर्चे किए बिना खुद के लिए storage facility ले सके. So that is through agricultural marketing infrastructure, to enhance their holding capacity in selling the product. So these 3 schemes the survey mentions, you can keep them in mind. Again, remember, these schemes become important as the survey mentions them because of the nature that it creates, because of the nature that it creates. Then, there is a box 2 that survey gives, and that box 2, according to me, is the most important part that we have here, in this chapter. A box 2 in survey, This, I think, is the most important part of this chapter, apart from the reasons that they give you for divergence between wholesale price index and consumer price index. दो बातें मुझे इस चैप्टर से सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट लगी. एक ये जो बॉक्स जिसको समराइज करता हूं मैं आपके साथ, और दूसरा कि क्या कारण है होलसेल प्राइस इंडेक्स और कंज्यूमर प्राइस इंडेक्स में फर्क आने का. Now see, when we look at this box, they give you the measures of the government, the measures taken by government to control inflation of essential commodities. क्या सरकार ने measures लिए हैं inflation रोकने के लिए essential commodities में. Measures taken by the government to control inflation of essential commodities. And they give you some word by word thing like pulses and onion. और इनके measures बताए हमें that on pulses and onion, the government has said that they will create a buffer stock. On pulses and onion, there is a creation of buffer stock. That is, सरकार स्टोर करके रख रही है कि अगर अचानक जरूरत पड़ी और इनका प्राइस ऊपर गया, then government will be able to control these things, the prices, much better. And government is in touch with farmer producers organization regarding that. So onion buffer stock is now around 2.08 lakh million ton. That is onion buffer stock. That it is 2.08 lakh metric ton. That is onion buffer stock. This is the highest India has kept in last few years. Highest India has kept in last few years. And the government has released it in a calibrated, that is gradual manner, to make sure that prices can be controlled. Similarly, for pulses, the government has been encouraging larger buffer. And the target for 21-22 for pulses, the target for 21-22 is 23 million million metric tons. So this is metric tons. So this is the target government is setting, that we should not have shortage of pulses and we should not have shortage of onions. Same targets have also been set about tomato and potato, and that way the prices can be stopped from fluctuating. Also, the government has kept some pulses in the free import category. From your prelims point of view, please keep it in mind that for pulses, tur and urad are in the free import category. So you don't have to face any restriction if you import within the limits set by the government. They are in the free import category. You don't face any restriction if you import it within the limit set by the government. And import duty on masoor has also been brought down substantially to make sure that more imports can be done. So import duties have been brought down and free import has been allowed. So on masoor, import duty including agri infrastructure development cess, ये जो मसूर के imports पे लगता है, both brought down. So these are some steps to keep in mind about how essential commodities like pulses and onions have been targeted by the government to control the rising price. Then remember, the second challenge we had was on edible oil. The second challenge that we had was on edible oil. If you recall, last year edible oil was doing all bonkers, and this year also with the Ukraine-Russia war, we see sunflower oil prices rising through the roof, and we can expect other prices hardening up because India still has to import a lot of edible oil. Now, the government has done few things there, as the survey says. So one thing is reducing import duty. That is one thing that has been done on edible oil. That import duty was reduced by the government when they saw that the prices were rising a lot. And the other is that the basic duty on palm oil and refined soybean oil and sunflower oil has also been reduced from 32.5% to 17.5%. So reducing import duty on edible oil. Actually, this was done holistically for all edible oil. this has been reduced, and then the base duty has been reduced, that is the base on which tax will be imposed, reduced on palm oil, sunflower oil, and sunflower oil is again rising through the roof with the Ukraine crisis that we see happening around us, and refined soybean oil. Again, these are less expected, but I don't want to take chance because prelims में वो क्या करते हैं, economic survey के boxes देखते हैं और आपसे सवाल पूछ लेते हैं. So these are the two steps that have been registered on edible oil, that we reduce the import duty and we reduce the base duty. And also the futures trading in mustard was suspended to avoid speculation. Futures trading in mustard was suspended. Futures trading in mustard suspended on National Commodity Exchange, on NCDEX. Future trading in mustard suspended on National Commodity Exchange to avoid speculation. The idea was that make sure that speculation can be avoided. And the Department of Food has put a stocking limit. These 3 and 4 that I am writing for you is to restrict speculation. ये जो 2 points मैं आपको लिख के दे रहा हूं, उनका पर्पस था कि जो स्पेक्यूलेशन हो रहा है क्रूड ऑयल में, वो रोका जा सके. So Department of Food and Commodity Stock has put up an upper limit, and that upper limit is that you cannot store food up beyond this on stocking. So this is the purpose. The purpose is to check the inflation in edible oil by trying to restrict the hoarding part, future speculation, reducing base duty and reducing import duty. So this is for edible oils that they say has been done. Also, government has said that secondary edible oil like rice bran oil should be promoted. That is another step taken that create alternative supply. Secondary edible oil like rice bran oil should be promoted. So that way people will consume those which are homegrown. Secondary edible oil like rice bran. If we can promote this can again reduce India's import dependency. If we can promote this can again reduce India's import dependency with respect to crude oil. So remember, this is something that they have worked on. Then the survey goes a little repetitive. They again mention Operation Green for the perishable essential commodities, and they say that it has been launched from 2018 and now it covers 41 perishables. Now this 41 perishables is important to keep in mind, in total, because earlier it was announced that there will be 23 perishables, but now it says 41 perishables. That is what the government has suggested now. So 41 perishables from 52 production clusters. So that is the other thing that they mention, that for those commodities which are or which can be perishables. So that is the fourth thing rather. For perishable commodities, they have introduced Operation Green, extending it, Operation Green, and the survey says that it is extended over 41 commodities which can be counted as perishable, giving them storage facilities and giving them, developing them in production clusters. And they say that 65 crore has been provided as subsidy here, but that is not important. This 41 commodities under Operation Green is what you should keep in mind. 41 commodities, but defined over 23 crops. Please keep 22 crops. Please keep that in mind. अगर एग्जाम में पूछते हैं प्रीलिम्स में कितने क्रॉप्स के ऊपर है ऑपरेशन ग्रीन 22 और कितने कमोडिटीज पे स्प्रेड है तो 41. That is how it should be taken. Possible, Shobit? It can hinder, Good to see you, Vikash. Then remember, we talk about the trends that then they give you a trend in wholesale price index. Don't bother about that. Mainly, then there are 2-3 points that they give you of the reasons for divergence between wholesale price index and commodity price index. You know, they give you the reasons for divergence between wholesale price index and commodity price index. That's equally important. You know, reasons for divergence between wholesale price index and commodity price index. Why are they diverging so much? So one reason they say is base effect. Base effect means that wholesale price index was at a low level in 2020-21 due to supply chain disturbance. So supply chain issues. इसके वजह से wholesale price index जो था वो कम था 2020-21 में, and consumer price index was relatively high because demand had not yet slumped entirely, was relatively high, you know, as retail saw difficulty, you know, so supply chain issues not yet grown. तो 2020 में सप्लाई चेन इश्यूज पूरी तरह से ग्रो नहीं हुए थे, तो होलसेल प्राइस इंडेक्स उतना नहीं बढ़ा था, रिटेल प्राइस इंडेक्स बहुत हाई था, जगह जगह लॉकडाउन्स थे, कंज्यूमर्स तक चीजें नहीं पहुंच रही थी, तो पेट्रोलियम का प्राइस कम था, एल्यूमिनियम का प्राइस कम था, तो इनपुट प्राइसेस कम थे, उनका WPI पे ज्यादा असर होता है. So since input prices were low, which influenced WPI a lot more, so wholesale price index remained relatively low and CPI remained high. Now in 2021-22, the base effect works. That wholesale price index looks higher in percentage term, while consumer price index looks relatively lesser in percentage terms, because consumer price index was high last year, so the base effect is opposite compared to wholesale price index, which was high last year, so the low last year, so the base effect turns opposite there. So this is one reason that they give, that is the impact, that due to COVID pandemic, WPI was low last year, CPI was high, and then the other way around. No, Tashmiya, edible oil cannot be included in crude oil. All right, edible oil cannot be included in crude oil. All right, don't mix the two. I am not mixing them at all. Now remember, in other thing that they say, that base effect is one factor, it is also imposed through the conceptual difference. So the second factor that they bring about over here is that the reason or the problem is due to conceptual difference between the two. The problem is due to conceptual difference. The way wholesale price index is defined is different as compared to consumer price index. So WPI is measured without considering services, and services have taken a large beating in the global market, while CPI includes services. So in that case, what happens is services price being low doesn't get seen in WPI, but it is seen in CPI. Also remember, a connected factor here is that WPI is affected more by change in price of crude oil, because when you change the price of crude oil, WPI gives larger weight to it. There is a larger weight for crude oil in WPI as compared to CPI, larger weight. तो जो इम्पोर्टेंस WPI देता है क्रूड ऑयल को, वो करीब 24% का वेटेज है, और CPI जो है वो क्रूड ऑयल को comparatively lesser weight देता है. So WPI has a 13.2% weight for crude oil, and CPI has a 6.8 weight, and that is why it results in the fuel group impacting WPI more than the CPI. The fuel group impacting WPI more than the CPI. Also remember, WPI gives larger weight to inputs. WPI gives larger weight to inputs, larger weight to inputs like metals and minerals, which have become costlier in the recent past due to reasons of supply chain disruption mainly, but CPI has lesser weight to it. So WPI, again the weights become a point here. So survey explains that these are the reasons why WPI and CPI diverge from each other. Why WPI and CPI diverge from each other. That CPI does not give much importance to inputs. Input prices have gone up. WPI gives a lot of importance to inputs, and due to that, again your divergence is observed. So this is again the idea that survey puts forward for why WPI and CPI are divergent from each other. Then the survey says that the global inflation has its impact on domestic inflation. The global inflation has had its impact on domestic inflation, and then compares, saying that even though India's inflation is high, yet compared to some major nations of the world like United States, United Kingdom, Germany, where the inflation rates have been one of the highest in several years, India has done much better by managing itself well. So that is what the survey concludes in its box 4, that global commodity prices have gone up, and those global commodity prices rising sharply mainly due to energy prices and metal prices and all, have resulted in high inflation worldwide. In India, the supply chain disruption affected us, and due to that effect of supply chain disruption, the prices did increase, but the increase in price is comparatively much in control compared to what we have seen with respect to the global price. In fact, cotton price, metal price, mineral price, and survey says that in some cases, India can also gain with the export revenue rising for India in that case. Sumit, it is difficult for me to take you into distinction between WPI and CPI in detail here, but I can tell you that WPI is wholesale price index. You take the price in the wholesale market and you do not take indirect taxes in it, and weightages given to different products are different. CPI is in the retail market and you do consider the impact of indirect tax in it, and you also consider the impact of services in it. So I hope, Sumit, this can help you for the time being. Now remember, the देवाशीष बेस इफेक्ट इज कहां से तुमने शुरुआत किया मेजर करना. जैसे मान लो तुम्हारा वजन है 40 केजी, मेरा वजन है 100 केजी. अब उस केस में अगर दोनों का वजन 10-10 केजी कम हुआ तो तुम्हारे 25% वजन कम हो गया, मेरा 10%, क्योंकि मेरा बेस इफेक्ट जो था 100 केजी वो ज्यादा था. I hope you get the point of base effect in that case, that my base on which percentage was calculated was 100 kg. So similarly think, if wholesale price index was already less, then the base at which you will calculate growth is less, so percentage increase will look much higher. Consumer price index, the effect was already high last year, so if now inflation happens, the effect will look relatively lesser. I hope you guys understand by the idea of base effect here. Okay. Now there is one last thing that survey says. There are 2 pages on housing prices and pharmaceutical pricing. Avoid them. Do not go much into that. There is one last thing on last page of the chapter. Survey gives a very interesting point, that is long-term measures by government to control inflation. Long run में क्या कर सकते हैं इन्फ्लेशन कंट्रोल करने को? ये अगर मेंस में भी पूछे तो बहुत ही अच्छा आंसर में एडिशन करने को मिलेगा आपको. साथ में आप एग्जामिनर को बताओगे कि आपने सर्वे पढ़ा है by writing these points. So even in the mains exam, if you ask me, thank you all for getting the joke. So even in the mains exam, if they by chance ask you these things, you will be able to answer with these points. So one is, they say that change production pattern, especially in agriculture. change in production pattern in agro commodities. Promote more growth of pulses, vegetables, oil seeds, and reduce the focus on rice and wheat. That is one thing. Promote more pulses and vegetables and oil seeds and reduce the focus on rice and wheat. That is one thing. Second is create a calibrated import policy. Do not shift immediately. Knee jerk reaction का मतलब होता है कोई भी चीज बढ़ते देखी फटाफट इंपोर्ट करना शुरू कर दिया, किसी चीज का प्राइस घटते देखा फटाफट एक्सपोर्ट करना शुरू कर दिया. ये नी जर्क रिएक्शन है. तो सर्वे कहते हैं ब्रिंग अ कैलिब्रेटेड इंपोर्ट पॉलिसी, ताकि आपके फार्मर्स को भी पता हो कि आप कब इंपोर्ट करोगे कब नहीं करोगे. तो आपकी इंपोर्ट पॉलिसी कंसिस्टेंट होनी चाहिए. ब्रिंग अ कैलिब्रेटेड इंपोर्ट policy. What is that calibrated? Sure, Jai Singh, I will be doing the optional discussion, definitely. So, when you look at calibrated import policy, a consistent approach over long term will be needed. So no knee-jerk reaction, थोड़ा सा प्राइस बढ़ा, import करना शुरू कर दिए, and so on. So no knee-jerk reaction and long-term consistent policy. ऐसी पॉलिसी बनाओ जो लॉन्ग टर्म के लिए कंसिस्टेंट रहे और आपके किसानों को इन्फॉर्म करो उसके बारे में. इन्फॉर्म द फार्मर्स दैट लुक, दिस इज आवर इंपोर्ट पॉलिसी, दिस इज हाउ वी प्लान टू मूव फॉरवर्ड, सो दैट दे आर कॉन्फिडेंट, they are confident how import duty can have an impact. Indirect taxes will have an impact, Devashish. Thank you, Pranav, means a lot. So, that is your calibrated import policy. And it says that is why now government is entering into long-term contract. अब गवर्नमेंट जैसे म्यांमार के साथ उड़द के कॉन्ट्रैक्ट किया कि 5-5 साल के कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करें कि भाई 5 साल तक तो इतना इंपोर्ट होता ही रहेगा. तो इससे फायदा यह है कि सबको पता रहेगा कि आप कितना इंपोर्ट कर रहे हो, तो आपके किसान अकॉर्डिंगली प्लान कर पाएंगे. So if everybody knows how the government is planning, if everybody knows how our country is planning, then the farmers within the country can plan better, and your exporters who are outside will also be certain that okay, this much market is now assured, let's keep selling to them. तो आपके जो बाहर हमारे जो एक्सपोर्टर्स हैं हमारे देश के, उनको भी पक्का रहेगा कि अच्छा भारत हमसे इतना तो खरीदेगा ही, और जो हमारे किसान हैं उनको पता रहेगा कि अच्छा इतना हमें प्रोड्यूस करना है, बाकी सरकार इंपोर्ट कर रही है, ये डिमांड है मार्केट में. सो दिस काइंड ऑफ कैलिब्रेटेड इंपोर्ट पॉलिसी विल अगेन हेल्प इन मेकिंग श्योर दैट वी डू सम गुड इंपोर्ट्स. एंड देन द अदर इज व्हिच वी हैव टॉक्ड मेनी टाइम्स, दैट फोकस ऑन ट्रांसपोर्टेशन एंड स्टोरेज इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. Focus on transportation and storage infrastructure. इस बात पे ध्यान दिया जाए कि आप ट्रांसपोर्ट बेटर कर सको. Mainly the idea is reduce wastage. जब आप ट्रांसपोर्ट बेटर कर पाओगे, कोल्ड स्टोरेज चेन्स होंगे, ट्रक्स ऐसे होंगे जो कोल्ड स्टोरेज कंटेनर्स चलाएंगे, तो आप बिना वेस्टेज के ट्रांसपोर्ट कर पाओगे. इफ यू आर ट्रांसपोर्टिंग with a cold storage chain, transporting with cold storage trucks, it will reduce wastage and reduce distress sale by giving benefits of storage. When you give benefits of storage to the farmers, they will not have to sell their perishables in distress, and then better management of demand supply gap can be achieved. So these are the suggestions that the survey gives, and says that effectively if we utilize these, then in the long term we can restrict food inflation. And if we can restrict food inflation in India, and gradually if we can shift, like if you ask me, now normally the food and fuel inflation can be countered like this. These for food inflation, and for fuel inflation, developing alternative and reducing wastage by training people. So electric vehicles being developed, renewable sources of energy being used. This is for fuel inflation that we can work over 10 to 15 years. We will be in a much better shape to be able to control inflation arising due to food and fuel. That ends the survey chapter 5 for us. I will meet you tomorrow for survey chapter 6 and we will cover up that, and then I will again give you a break of 2 days, and then we will begin with 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you. Thank you a lot for being there, and actually it means a lot that you take time out and come over and see me here. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow then. Thank you. Yes, Devashish, that happens at times. Rishabh, if you could please see it when the video is uploaded on YouTube. Thank you. Good night, all of you. Stay safe and stay happy. Good night and prepare well. Your prelims are closer now for 22 people. Prepare well, stay happy. Bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow then. Thank you. Thank you all who are leaving now. Thanks a lot.